What's good? What's good? What's good, everybody? This your boy D Money. We on another day in the life. We on another day in the life of a designer. Make sure that you guys like and subscribe, tap in. We primarily have been focusing on, what I'm saying, fashion, culture, the design eye, the business side of things. And, ultimately tonight, we're going to talk about the death of the fashion gatekeeper. You feel me? How, the internet changed who gets to decide what matters. You feel me? So make sure that y'all like and subscribe, share with your friends and family so that way they can see what we got going on here at Dreams of Ruler Street Fashion. And also check out our From the Mud collection as well too. It's available on our website. We also got the From the Mud spoken word album, which is available on all streaming platforms. And we also got our um, From the Mud poetry book as well too. So make sure you guys tap in with that as well too. And it's at your local library. So definitely start visualizing your purpose. You feel me? So as y'all know, we always open up with an opening question when it comes down to, starting these chats. And, the main question is, who gets to decide what deserves attention, legitimacy, and cultural importance in fashion now? You feel me? Social media is powerful. It's, about how, fashion lost its centralized authority, not necessarily about, just how powerful social media is. You feel me? We're going to talk about the overall landscape of things. So, the old fashioned system, who had the power? That was the real, question and overall, I guess you could say thing back in the early days of fashion, well before internet was even thought of. The designer needed, what I'm saying, access to institutions. Those major gatekeepers were fashion magazines, buyers, department stores, fashion weeks, editors, what I'm saying, celebrities, and luxury retailers. You feel me? The fashion magazines decided what received editorial attention. The buyers decided what entered, important stores. Department stores, control physical distribution. And, fashion weeks determine who was, placed inside the official fashion calendar. Celebrities could drastically increase desirability even now today. And, luxury retailers help determine which brands were considered legitimate. A designer could make something incredible and still remain visible because the system controlled access to the audience. You feel me? So the internet broke the distribution monopoly. You feel me? The internet changed the equation. Now, all the designer got to do is pretty much design, produce, take photos of all of the products and garments, you feel me, publish, and then, tell the story, find the audience, and sell it without asking a magazine buyer or a department store to, sell it, market it, whatever, and that's a big change because mostly, how companies was branding was through billboards and TV commercials. You feel me? Like, gatekeepers didn't necessarily disappear because, they still there. They still in most of those, institutions that I just named. But the number of, gatekeepers multiplied as well, too. You feel me? So Instagram changed, fashion discovery. Instagram turned the fashion image into a direct distribution tool. Same as TikTok as well, too. You feel me? A small designer could potentially appear beside luxury houses, celebrities, established designers, stylists, and fashion publications. The audience didn't necessarily need to encounter you through a store. All they got to do is, encounter you through their phone. So, what's good? It is really David. Appreciate you for tapping into the live. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share with your friends and family. Please subscribe and share with your friends and family so that way we can continue to grow and your friends and family can check out the gems we drop in here at Dreams of Rulers, where we primarily, what's good, the Goose, what's good, everybody. Appreciate y'all for tapping in. Make sure y'all like and subscribe. Check out our website. Link is in the bio. Appreciate everybody. What we're talking about tonight is, the death of the gatekeeper. And where we at with it is that, comes down to Dreams of Rulers connection with this part where we're talking about, Instagram and TikTok change fashion discovery. Appreciate you, Zayden. But the audience, necessarily needed to encounter you through a store before. Now they don't. They just need your social platforms. And, they're not just for advertising. They're part of the infrastructure of your fashion house. You feel me? And that's why, you see us on live streams. We got the podcast, a lot of fashion podcasts. We got, Design With Me web series, Rulers Universe web series, and also Unpackage as well, too. So, these things, what we're talking about is the death of fashion gatekeepers. So, pretty much internet, media, and all of these resources have changed the landscape of how fashion was, produced, marketed, and distributed throughout, the world. Pretty much you needed department stores, fashion editorials, what else? Buyers, fashion weeks, celebrities, and luxury retail stores, you feel me? So with all those things not really big now or, really even in place anymore, now it's pretty much all on you. You got to show up for your brand. You got to use the resources that are there for you, like Instagram, TikTok, and even YouTube now, because YouTube really changed the game for everybody, every form of business. And if you use it right, you can really, take things to another level to where directed to consumer becomes insane. Because this is where, day in the life of a designer became important. Traditionally, people saw the garment, Now they see me, the designer, talking about, thinking about, sharing my mindset with you guys on how I design these garments, you feel me? Where I actually, get these design ideas from, how I manifest these ideas as well, too. So it's also giving you, free game on how to do it, but also on, what we do in order to, make these products, you feel me? So you get a full, visual almost of everything that's going on without you having to question, anything for real, because we explaining, why we designed something, what influenced it, what you're struggling, within the designs, what we're building within the designs, what collections actually mean, where the company is going. You don't need somebody else to interpret your work for you anymore. That's ultimately what we're saying here. That's a major shift. The designer can become the publisher, you feel me? The creative director and everything. But the gatekeeper didn't die. This is where the, episode gets its nuance. You feel me? The algorithm became the gatekeeper. TikTok became the gatekeeper, Instagram, YouTube, search engines, and even the audience became a gatekeeper in a sense. You know, the difference is that there are now many doors instead of one door. And those doors operate according to different rules. So that's why, a lot of us got different routes on how we doing and how we building. Attention isn't the same as legitimacy. This is where, you challenge social media. A designer can get 1 million views and still have no fashion authority, meaning, he's not really getting any sales, brand recognition, or building a solid reputation off of it. You feel me? Another designer can have, 5,000 highly engaged followers and be building a serious fashion institution. So the new question isn't, can I get attention? It's more about, what am I building with the attention? You feel me? The new gatekeeper might be, the audience. This is the most interesting part of everything, because previously the editor was the audience. Now the designer and the audience are one-on-one. There's no middleman, pretty much. So, the audience can determine what spreads, what gets discussed, what gets purchased. You feel me? What gets copied and what becomes culturally relevant. You feel me? That's ultimately the biggest thing. Damn. I'll pull my hand. But, what you call it? A designer, still has to say, I know what you're asking for, but I also know what I believe needs to exist. That's where creative leadership comes in. You know what I'm saying? If you don't let the audience determine everything, you stop leading. So you got to make sure that, you understand what you're doing with your art, but also have a clear sense of what your audience wants as well too. Like Dapper Dan said on one of the TikTok videos he was in recently, he said, when you're building your brand, you ultimately want to not necessarily fall in line with the trends, but somewhat align with them, with your brand, and, stick to some of the norms until your brand gets recognition, and then start experimenting with your ideas. That's how, you build long-term success. And I somewhat agree with that, but I feel like you should go ahead first with your designs, you know what I'm saying? Because eventually people are going to come back around. If you actually build something solid, people are always going to come back around. You feel me? So, ultimately what happened to Fashion Week? Because we can all see that joint's going down the shitter. But it no longer it still matters, but it no longer has the absolute monopoly on fashion legitimacy. You feel me? The designer can build anticipation through Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, live streams, short films, digital, presentation, and direct-to-consumer releases. Independent, events, like, for example, with us, the live stream isn't competing with Fashion Week. It's just another path into the fashion system. You feel me? Instead of institution, it's about audience. So, we're just experimenting with designer, audience, community, and fashion house. The independent designer has more power, but more responsibility. You feel me? So, the old system controlled access. The new system gives you access. And, now you have to build everything. You have to become, a designer, publisher, marketer, storyteller, distributor and business owner. That's both freedom and burden, because now you have more responsibility to get shit done. And, even if you delegate, that's just more people you gotta, incorporate. The uncomfortable truth is the internet, democratized access to, the audience, and it didn't really democratize, the ability to build a great fashion house. You still need great design, consistency, capital, production, business discipline, distribution, cultural relevance, and time. So, who's really the gatekeeper now? Nobody and everybody at the same time. Because ultimately, y'all got the shortest attention span of all time. Then on top of that, these algorithms control discovery. Retailers still control a sense of, distribution. Editors still, influence legitimacy. And then celebrities still influence the culture while capital still determines the scale. And, a designer, now controls their own publishing. And increasingly, culture itself becomes the gatekeeper. Because if people actually care, the system has much harder time ignoring it. What that actually means for us, dreams of rulers, this is where, you make your own official fashion house. You feel me? Doesn't have to wait, for somebody to declare it. We just building, evidence for ourselves through every collection, through every garment, through every live stream, through every film, through every decision, whether it be design or business, and every piece of writing and archive, creates a public record of the house developing. So eventually the body of work becomes harder to dismiss than the lack of, institutional approval. The final question is, if nobody has to give you permission to enter fashion anymore, what excuses does the independent designer have? Just to take it further, the gatekeepers used to control whether people could discover you. Today you can reach people yourself, but the freedom creates a new responsibility. You have to build something worth discovering. And, the old-fashioned system could keep you outside the door. The internet opens the door. Now the question isn't whether can I get inside. The question is whether I'm going to build once I'm here. You feel me? So it's just something to ultimately think about, as you continue to grow. A lot of us continue to use like the gatekeeping thing as I guess you could say, an excuse to not chase our dreams and goals, but you can. And you can ultimately gain the success that you was looking for in the first place. It's just the landscape changed. Rules didn't. It's just, like I said, the landscape changed. So, you just got to get creative on both sides of everything when it comes to business and the art. And once you do that, everything will fall into place. So, like I said, like I always say, it only takes a solid plan, solid research, and you execute that motherfucker. Once you do that, your dreams and goals will always come to fruition. Make sure y'all guys check out our From the Mud collection on our website. Spoken Word album, we just dropped 2 new videos. And make sure you also check out, our poetry book as well too. I'll catch y'all on the next live stream. Keep visualizing. I'm out.